Hello, my government friends. Today you are watching your first lecture video for our American Government Semester course. And the topic today is Introduction to Our Government and Its Principles. So, what is government? What is its purpose? And what are the 5 principles that have outlined what our government looks like? And that is a huge part of your air test, actually. So I do just want to quickly remind you, since this is your first lecture video, that your notes are located in your Unit 1 digital notebook in Google Classroom. And this particular set of notes can be found on slide or page 3. So you can see this is your notebook here. And it'll be these notes on slide 3. Please remember that you can zoom in and zoom out with this tool right here. So zoom out, zoom in. That will help you maybe see the questions and what you're typing a little bit better. Okay, so your objectives, what you should be able to do at the end of this video is list and define the 5 major principles of government. And those principles are really what outline our beliefs and values on what government, really how it should be set up and what it should do. And before you even get into filling in the blanks and answering some of the questions, I want you to just take a moment and answer the intro question on your notes, which is, what is government in your own words? If you had to define it without me giving you a definition, what is it? What is its purpose? Just as a reflection before we get into this. So take a moment, pause the video, write your reflection in your digital notebook, and then restart the video when you're ready to move on. So our course definition of government is this. Government is the organizations that have the power to make and carry out laws and decisions for those living in a community. You might also see this word organizations be institutions. And really that's just talking about the branches of government. Now, I want you to think about why it is that we have this, right? The power to make and carry out laws and decisions for those living in a community, right? Think about a sport. Let's go with basketball because the playoffs are happening right now. So think about playing basketball and imagine that there were no rules, there were no referees. Those things are the government. Those rules and referees are the government, right? It would be a complete free-for-all out there on the court, just like it would be here in society, right? If there were no government to make or enforce laws and regulations, right, it would be chaotic. So government keeps things orderly, right? And it keeps everybody kind of in check and in line and doing what we need to be doing, right? Now, there are 4 functions of government. I'll move myself up here. And I do want you guys to just get this written down so that way we can think about where our principles fit into these. So first things first is keeping order. Okay, one of the purposes of government is to pass and enforce laws, right? We said without those rules and regulations, it would be complete chaos, right? So these rules of conduct, so to speak, some of them protect safety, some protect your property, some your rights, which everyone holds very close to them, right? Like free speech, that's a very, very big one right now. So it's keeping order. Now, when it comes to enforcing, right, think about it like this, right? If there was no enforcement of laws, no one would follow the laws, right? If a teacher doesn't actually give a consequence for a certain action, then you're going to keep doing the behavior. If you keep speeding and you never get a ticket, you're going to keep speeding. Okay, so that's what it means to enforce a law. Okay. Another way that the government keeps order is to establish courts, and the courts decide whether people accused of a crime are actually guilty, how long they should be punished, et cetera, et cetera. Now, providing security, I think this one's pretty straightforward. The government is responsible for establishing armed forces, protecting against foreign attacks, but also at a local level, right? Just against a little bit more order, right? Your policemen, your sheriffs that monitor traffic and enforce those laws and provide security. The government also provides services, and one of those big services is protecting public health and safety and providing public welfare. So the government runs schools, it runs libraries, parks. They're responsible for repairing roads and maintenance on city and county and government roads. They collect garbage at obviously the local level, deliver the mail, the USPS, right? You have the police and the fire that are providing security, but also services for people when there's a fire, for instance, in your neighborhood. Another more obviously current example of the government fulfilling its function of providing services, protecting public health and safety, right? Think COVID. Think the responses that the state, local, and federal governments have taken to protect people. So, states giving out food, the government giving out monetary support, all of these plans that are in place and guidelines in place for protecting one another against COVID, that is a function of government. Now, guiding the community is the fourth and final function of government. And the main way that the government does this is through something called public policy. So the government develops public policy, which really are the decisions and actions that a government takes to really solve problems in the community. And that can be anything. So public policy was the COVID relief bill that I'm sure many of your families received. It's putting in a stop sign when citizens complain about reckless drivers on their street. Okay, it can be very minimal or small to very large and impactful for many people. Other ways that the government guides the community is managing the economy and conducting foreign relations. So they're really guiding our community and our country toward positive relationships with other countries, making sure that our economy is stable and people have jobs. So take a moment now, again, pause the video for me, and on your notes, there is a section for you to answer which of these functions of government do you think is the most important and why? So is it to keep order, provide security, provide services, or guide the community? So I want to quickly talk about the system of government that we have in America, the type of government that we have in America. And America is a representative democracy. And you've probably heard this term before. This is a government in which citizens elect a group of people to represent them, to make laws and govern on their behalf. And compare this to a direct democracy, where people vote on all issues directly, like in Athens, Greece. So that's not how we do things here because really our country's huge. There's too many people. It's just not feasible. It doesn't work. So the way that our government is set up is you elect people to represent you and your interests. They are supposed to represent the will of the people once they are in power. And they're the ones that actually make the laws. Okay, so it's a little bit of a different type of democracy versus, the old school way in Athens where everybody raises their hand, yes or no. This is more of an indirect way of voting. So another term for this type of democracy is indirect or representative democracy. Now, let's talk about the 5 principles of government. As I said, these are very, very, very hot topics when it comes to your air test. So I want to make sure that we are good to go on these. Now, these principles and values of our government were largely shaped by our dislike of the British monarchy, the king. Boo. We were not a fan, obviously, of monarchy after the American Revolution, and we really were wanting to guide our government away from that style or that system. So, our very first principle of government is popular sovereignty. Popular sovereignty is really the idea that the ultimate power, the ultimate authority in our government, who has the say, is the people. People power. Okay, that is how I want you to remember popular sovereignty. The government wouldn't have any power to do anything if it weren't for the people. Okay, and again, this was a reaction to the king where we really didn't have any say. We didn't give our consent for a lot of those issues that led us to rebel. So, examples that you will see often as examples of popular sovereignty. We the people from the United States Constitution. The Constitution, that's how it starts. We the people, right? We establish the government. We have that authority. In the Declaration of Independence, consent of the governed, right? The government has to do things based on the consent of the people, the permission of the people. And then also voting and elections, right? The people can vote for representatives that they want to represent them in the government. But just as easily, if the representative is not following the will or the consent of the people, they can vote them out of office just as easily. So people are really the ultimate and final say when it comes to giving the government power and who has a say. The next principle of government is limited government, and we will talk about limited government a lot. But really, limited government is what it sounds like. The government is not all powerful. The rulers or the leaders of our government are not all powerful. We used to have a king who was. We didn't really like that. So we wrote our Constitution to limit the power of the government and the people in charge. And we do that through the Constitution. The government can only exercise powers given to it in the Constitution, right? There are restrictions put in place as to what it can and cannot do. No one is above the law. We call this concept rule of law, right? Just because you are in a position of power doesn't mean that you can break the law and not face consequences, right? As we'll see, there are legal consequences still when you are even the president or on the Supreme Court, okay? So think about limited government, because I know this is a very broad topic, but think about limited government as the Constitution putting a leash on the government to prevent it from walking over our freedoms. And this is usually an analogy that helps my students remember limited government, okay? We, the people, are the sole authority of government, right? We are the ones that give government the power, okay? When you put a leash on a dog, you are in charge of that dog, right? When you take it on a walk, right? You direct it, you make sure it doesn't run away from you and get out of control. So we, the people, are putting a leash on the government by the Constitution to prevent it from walking all over our freedoms and going outside of where we want it to go. Okay, so hopefully that helps you maybe put an example or a context to this principle of limited government. Now, real life examples of limited government, especially rule of law and restrictions on government power. The president must obey the laws, or they can be impeached or removed from office. That is an example of the rule of law, right? If the president breaks the law, they will be removed from office and then they will face legal consequences. So we've had several presidents impeached. Johnson, Clinton is what you see here. And then President Trump was impeached by the House of Representatives just earlier this year in 2020 in January. None of them were ever removed from office, but they were at least put on trial in the Senate for potentially breaking laws and obstructing justice and the role of government. Another example of limited government is a police officer just can't seize your property without probable cause, right? They need a warrant. The Constitution says through our Bill of Rights that you have the right against unreasonable searches and seizures. The government can't just come in and do whatever it wants. It has to present a warrant or probable cause that it can search your stuff. Okay, so it is limited in what it can do, and the rights that you have protects that. Third, our third principle of government is separation of powers. And this distributes all governmental powers into three branches. So separation of powers is your three branches of government. And each branch has a specific field of authority, unique set of responsibilities. Each branch is designed to do a certain thing when it comes to making laws, public policy. Right? The legislative branch, which is Congress, makes the laws. The executive branch, which is the president, is responsible for enforcing the laws, making sure that they're being followed by the people and the government. And the judicial branch, the court system, both the federal, state, and local, interpret the laws to make sure that they are actually constitutional. Okay. So I want you to pause and reflect on this question here. Why do we do this? Why is it, do you think, that we separate all of these different powers into three branches? Why don't we keep it as just one branch? Why isn't all of these powers with one person? What are the positives of this, of separating it out into three? What are the cons? What are the negatives of doing this? So pause the video and reflect for me really quickly on your notes. And then when you're ready, go ahead and press play again. Hopefully you have had time to answer that question. Why do we do this? Why do we separate powers? Remember, guys, we came from a king. A king has all of these powers rolled into one. So we wanted to make sure that the government wasn't too powerful, that it was limited. Okay. Now, pros of this: we avoid what is called tyranny, abuse of government power. Okay. Each branch has a certain set of responsibilities. What are the cons? What are the negatives? This does slow down the process a little bit, right? When you have to go through three different branches of government to have a working system, things can take a while. Things take a little bit longer. Action is not as immediate. So just some thoughts for you to jot down if you didn't have those on your question. So this is what I'm talking about when we're talking about separation of powers: legislative, executive, judicial. Okay, and you can just get a sense of a little bit more of their unique responsibilities from this picture here. We will spend an entire unit talking about and breaking down these three branches. Our fourth principle is checks and balances. And checks and balances is a system where once you have your powers split into three branches, each branch of government is able to then check or limit or restrain the power of the other two branches. So we wanted to make sure that one branch didn't become too powerful. So each can take action against the other branches to prevent that from happening. So, for example, we know from the last slide that the legislative branch, Congress, writes the laws. Okay. Well, before a law can actually become a law, the president has to sign it, and they can veto or reject a law. Okay, that is probably one of the most common examples that you can think of for checks and balances, is the president vetoing or rejecting a law that Congress writes. Okay. The judicial branch, the court system, interprets laws. Let's say the president signs that law. It might go to the courts, and the Supreme Court might say, nope, that is not constitutional. It's no longer then a law. Okay, so it is restricting and limiting the power of the other two branches, making sure that one doesn't go too far or get too powerful. And our fifth and final principle of government is this idea of federalism. And we'll talk about federalism later this unit, but just as a definition right now, federalism is a system of government that divides the powers and responsibilities between the national, state, and local government. So really this is division of powers. There are three types of powers. Enumerated powers are powers directly granted to the national government, declaring war, coining money, those big ones. Reserved powers are powers set aside or reserved, like you reserve a table at a restaurant, they set it aside for you, for the states. And this is really outlined by the 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights. And then also you have concurrent powers. Concurrent powers are those powers shared by the state and federal governments, like the ability to tax, right? If you have a job, you will notice on your paycheck that you pay Cincinnati taxes probably, definitely Ohio taxes, and federal taxes. So that is a concurrent power. Okay, so the powers, as you can see, are divided based on the level of government. And this is a Venn diagram that you will see quite a bit as we move through this class, but we do live both national and state governments, right? National powers, the states also have certain powers, and shared powers as well. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in depth later this unit and the rest of the semester. So that wraps up the first lecture video for our class. And remember, your learning objective for this particular set of notes was to list and define the 5 major principles of government. So your next task is to answer this learning objective question in Edpuzzle. Make sure that you guys are filling in those notes. Go back if you need to, if you missed anything. Write down any questions you have for me when you see me in class, and I will talk to you guys soon. See you later.